Hey guys, so I hope we are all in the right place, or more specifically, I hope I am. Good to see you guys here. Stephanie, Terry, Leah, good to see you guys. So we're gonna deal with scenarios in this particular live stream. So actually, two opposing scenarios: a lone wolf scenario, and just bear in mind that that is fundamentally incompatible with a multiple perpetrator scenario, right? They're totally different. A lone wolf and, almost in terms of a random situation or in terms of a premeditated situation is very different to two people involved in something. And I'll explain why that is. We're also going to be dealing with this article, or more particularly, this individual, right? Can you guys see that? Carroll County Prosecutor Robert Ives. This is from an article dated March 14, 2017. It's about a month after the event, the double murders of Abby and Libby, 13th February. So we're going to kind of come back to that. We're going to kind of circle back to that. Before we deal with that, I also want to just mention that we're going to refer to, sorry, not that, this Down the Hill episode. It's basically that one, signatures. We're going to be referring to that, and also the transcript from that. I will provide a link to that for you guys. But I don't know if you guys are aware of this breaking news in terms of the Delphi case. A Franklin, Indiana attorney has been appointed to represent the Delphi murder suspect, Richard Allen. So that was sort of announced just before 2 p.m. today, right? It says here, a paralegal at Baldwin, Perry, and Camish told the Journal and Courier that Baldwin filed as co-counsel. It's quite weird reading about Baldwin here because we're dealing with another Baldwin. But anyway, in the possibility that other attorneys may also be appointed to represent Allen. So that's quite interesting. So it's a guy called Andrew J. Baldwin, may be representing Richard Allen. Okay, let's have a look at who is here. Liz Graham, S.M. Kobelinsky, Terry, Debbie, good to see you. Yeah, I've got to just put in a little bit of a disclaimer. I took a powerful antihistamine not that long ago, and they tend to really hit me quite hard. So if I'm a little bit cuckoo or even a lot cuckoo, sorry about that. Yeah, lone wolf. Okay, so let's kind of go right into the analysis. I also just kind of want to say that, let me just see if I can bring up this particular image. Let's just do that. Yeah, so I just kind of want to be quite sort of explicit in just saying that this is difficult and dark terrain, right? I'm saying it before we go into it. I think you guys know this anyway, but it's not only the fabric of the crime itself, but so much has been withheld from us, from the true crime community, from the media for so long that even in terms of the crime scene, it's very it's sort of murky and it's difficult to sort of figure your way through. Think also, so certain aspects, even in terms of the main suspect who you see over here, remain fuzzy. So we're literally trying to pick our way through an asymmetrical outdoor crime scene, kind of in the dark, And this particular Robert Ives, the prosecutor, I think he's Carroll County prosecutor, I think he's retired now. He also said that outdoor crime scenes are not all that typical. Police and investigators and lawyers, you don't typically deal with. You often have a crime scene inside of a room, and it's quite clear this is the crime scene, and that is in a way what makes this particular case quite difficult and quite complicated. Marlene says, now that defense counsel has been appointed, will he want the affidavit released? I doubt whether his own lawyers would really push for that, but it's an interesting question. Yeah, I'd also be surprised if they're released. Okay, so in saying that this is difficult and dark terrain, we're going to kind of be finding our way, picking our way through this outdoor crime scene in the dark. So there is a certain level of a speculation in here that is admittedly high, and I'm not terribly comfortable with. I don't really like speculating when the amount of information is somewhat limited. But what you're going to see is I'm nevertheless going to be trying to move our knowledge base forward based on what we do know, right? Thanks a lot, Stephanie. Okay, so let's kind of get going. Let's deal with the lone wolf scenario. Before we do, let me quickly ask you, how many of you think that that is likely? How many of you, before we even go into it, how many of you think that this is a lone wolf scenario? And by lone wolf scenario, I mean the person who was with Libby and Abby that day in that sort of forest area. That's what I mean. So let's have a look. I'm seeing quite a few. I'm seeing like, I don't know why someone put 2. No, yes, possible, not probable. I feel like he had help. Someone says not likely, highly unlikely. SM Kowalinsky says, I do, except for perhaps an accessory. Debbie says, I think lone wolf. True Crime Time says, not a loner. Brian says, unknown. Yeah, as in one killer. That's what we mean by lone wolf. Mel says, I don't think so. Deborah says, I feel it is possible. So quite a mixed bag. There's quite a lot of you think that it is a lone wolf, and quite a few of you don't. Marlene says, I think that there were accessories before the fact and after. Let me be explicit about what I'm talking about. A lone wolf being the person who literally murdered Abby and Libby. Was it one person, or were there 2 people present there? Right? That's kind of what I'm getting at. Well, what's going on? Okay, so right. I'm not asking, do you think that there was an accessory? I'm saying, in terms of the crime scene, in terms of the bridge and that area, was there one person present or not? That's what we're talking about. Okay. Okay, so this is what I put together based on where we are right now. So I want to bring up, first of all, this image. And I also want to bring up this image. I'll also want to bring up that image. I'll sort them out in a moment. That one and of course this one, right? Okay. So this is probably one of the best images we've got of the scene. Obviously, it was winter time, right? Does it look like there's someone standing there? Does that look like there's someone there already? Could that be someone there? I wonder. But essentially, that is the fabric of the forest at this point, right? So that's the first thing I want to raise. The other thing is, again, just a reminder that most of the bridge is away from this river, right? Most of the bridge, that's the side they approach from, the north side, and then there's a long way to go to get to this side. And that image of Abby is taken somewhere over here, right? Okay, you guys with me? Now, what I want you to think about is them, both Abby and Libby, walking through this section. And bear in mind that bridge guy would also come from that side, right? He would later emerge from that side. Okay. Life after life says that's not a person that was verified. Okay. The point is that a person did later come from there, right? That's the point. So anyway, let's get going. I wonder if I shouldn't show you the text that I'm reading from, then you can see it as I go through it. Okay. The perpetrator is hiding in the thin veil of winter woods when Abby and Libby passed by. There, but invisible, he waits for them to pass him, waits for both teens to step onto the bridge and watches them slowly cross it. This brief moment is an analogy for what Bridge Guy's been doing for years, waiting, watching, spectating, standing in the background, looking in from the sidelines. He's good at it because he's been a wallflower his whole life, but not now. Now he wants to make some sort of move. Now he wants to come out of the ether. He wants to come out of hiding and take control. Only once they are on the far side, right? Only once they are here and confident that no one else is in the area, no one else is kind of coming from that side, does the perpetrator step onto the bridge himself. This is his most authentic moment, a moment he has fantasized about for weeks, months, perhaps even years. If he has never committed a crime on paper, it's also true that he has committed the crime he is about to commit dozens of times, perhaps hundreds of times in his mind. It is this extreme sexual addiction that is reflected in the violent destruction of bodies, as we saw in the Chris Watts case. Chris Watts case also extreme sexual addiction, and then this almost psychopathic approach to little children, right? Okay. So that's the first section I want to deal with. The perpetrator approaches Abby and Libby and he pulls out a revolver that is on obviously this side of the bridge, right? When he comes to this side of the bridge, this side, hang on, this side, not that side. That's where the river is, the side that she's on, that side. Also, can you see that there's a road over here, right? Can you see that there's a road here and that there's actually a kind of embankment here as well, right? You see that? There's a road going underneath this, right? Okay. So the perpetrator approaches them, pulls out a revolver, and now that they are completely under his control, he motions to them, guys, down the hill. Right? And now I want to refer to you to this website. It's Actus Reus. I'm not quite sure who the author of it is, but it's actually taking material from the, what's her name again? Is it Julie Melville? Just trying to think who the author was of this video. Well, I'm sure you guys can kind of, is her name Julie Melville? So she actually captured this video, right? And just see if I can do that. Right, and so this is what you see when you come to the other side of the bridge. You see that, and then you see, well, that's the end of it, right? Okay. Miranda says, thanks so much for the super sticker. Oh, thanks a lot, Miranda. Thanks a lot for that. Miranda writes, so I wasn't quite sure what that meant. Okay, so I want to just see if I can bring this up again. Just a second. Okay, here it is. So it's taken by Julie Melvin, right? That's who you're sort of looking for. So let me give you the web address a second time, right? And have you guys seen this before? Have you guys seen this? So let me just bring it up as big as I can. It's not really allowing me to go much bigger than that. It's unfortunate. I can't really go bigger than that. But can you guys see that that's the end of the bridge, and there's a little path, and now we go a bit further. There we're coming to the very edge, right? And there the path sort of continues. And is that down the hill? And there you look from that point. So you've just come over the bridge, right? And you kind of get this idea that to the left is down the hill, and there's a road over there, right? There's a road. There the road continues. Have you guys seen some of these images? Okay. Blitzkrieg, thanks so much for your research. Thanks a lot for that. Okay, so so that is what I think the down the hill part literally looked like, felt like, right? And the other thing I believe is at the bottom of the hill, that is where that road that you see, there's a private driveway. And I think there was a vehicle at that point. It wasn't just go down the hill. There's a vehicle parked right there. And probably there were often vehicles there because probably sometimes the public took this unconventional route to access that sort of that park. So I don't know if it would be that strange for somebody who lived there to see vehicles sometimes parked there, because it was kind of a local tourist attraction, right? So to give you an idea, where I live, there's a conservancy, and you've got exactly the same thing. You've kind of got a gate where you punch in a key, and there are always a lot of cars parked there. But there's an alternative access somewhere else, and you sometimes see cars parked there, with people walking their dogs, exactly the same situation. It's an alternate access point. It's not necessarily an official way of getting in, it's just another way of getting in. Thanks a lot, Sharon. Okay, so what I believe happened at this point was that the perpetrator shepherded both girls to his vehicle and subdued both of them using an injected sedative, right? That's one scenario, that they were sedated in the vehicle. That's one scenario to this. The other scenario is that they were sedated only at the crime scene, right? And the reason why it's important to see and to say that there was a sedative, I know Stephanie also thinks there was, is because of the following. Let me bring that up. Libby and Abby had no visible signs of a struggle or a fight. So what that means is very early on, very soon after he said, guys down the hill, they were unable to struggle or fight. Now, I think one explanation for why there's no struggle or fight is there would be no point if he pulls out a gun, right? So that would be a initial. So in other words, if it's a situation of, well, I've got a gun on you, you know, and if you try to run away, you know, there's no point. And also, if one of you tries to run away, or you're going to abandon your friend, and he may even have held on to one of them. But the point is, there were no visible signs of a fight, right? So that does raise this question: how does he subdue them without injuring them? So the one answer to that is a sedative. Do you guys agree with that? Sorry, not a sedative, a weapon like a gun, not a knife, a gun, something that you can't quickly run away from, right? Imagine someone standing right next to you and they pull out a gun. There's just no way you can sort of outrun that sort of thing, right? So that's the first thing. But then the second thing is when the activity that actually takes place, the painful activity, the basically the incident itself, there can't be a struggle or a fight as well, right? So I think that there was a gun and a drug, right? Not just holding a gun, because there are two people as well. There's a gun and a drug, right? And it says here, during the processing of the crime scene, investigators located unknown fibers and unidentified hairs, which may later be used for comparison. Now, that makes me think that they went inside a vehicle. Right? How could the fibers and unidentified hairs, how could they get onto them other than via being inside a vehicle? Does that make sense? So I'm not speculating on the basis of just speculation. It's in this affidavit. Where did these fibers and unidentified hairs come from? Okay. So the Rockaways said, how do you carry a sedated 200-pound girl down a hill and across a creek? That's an excellent point. And that raises then the next possibility, which is, so you've got to explain why are there these unidentified fibers, right? Now, it could be that they just go to the vehicle and nothing. Or it could be that the vehicle is there or somewhere around there and they don't go to the vehicle. or it could be that he goes to the vehicle and he takes something out of the vehicle, a bag, whatever, right? The next point, which is exactly what you're saying, is that maybe he doesn't sedate them right there. And it raises this question, where is the crime scene? So if the crime scene isn't the vehicle, isn't below the bridge, then how does he get them to the crime scene? And I think the one option is that he drives them there. Another option is that he carries them there, which I agree is not likely. And the third option, which I initially thought was unlikely, but I'm starting to think now is more likely, is that he shepherded them there in the same way that he marched them down the hill. Did he not march them further, right? And the question then is where, how far was it? Because the further it is, the less likely it becomes. If it's just down the hill and it's just a crossover there, then that becomes likely. Do you guys agree with that? No, it's not chloroform. I'm not thinking about chloroform. I must say chloroform is very over emphasized in true crime. It really shouldn't be. I'm not really going to address that here, why you shouldn't think about chloroform. Okay, so the sedative, I believe, is sourced from the pharmacy store, and it may be something like Rohypnol, right? So can you guys see that? I'm talking about not a little bit of Rohypnol, but a lot. What happens when you receive a lot of this particular substance? Severe sedation. You basically are like in a state of paralysis. You can't respond. You cannot move. You can be barely conscious, right? You're alive, but you're not really able to do anything. And if Jeffrey Dahmer was able to continue what he was doing, I think he would have eventually turned to Rohypnol, because it would create the kind of situation he wanted, which is someone that can't do anything, but they're still alive, right? Right. And so what I think happened was that they were sedated at some point, but they were sedated through injection. It wasn't like asking them to, here is a pill, and please drink it, right? I don't think that was the case. I think it was literally injected. Cynthia says, I highly doubt they were sedated. Yeah, so I'm not saying an oral drug. I'm saying an injected drug. The pharmacy doesn't dispense injectable sedatives as far as I'm aware. Stephanie, what do you say about injectable sedatives? Yeah, I said something like Rohypnol, right? Something like that. And try not to use all caps, Cynthia. Perry says, is there new info related to sedation? I'm just trying to get Stephanie's response to this, because Stephanie knows this field quite well. Could you get something like this sort of drug in an injectable form at a pharmacy? Propofol, as far as I know, it was injected, Marlene. So Stephanie says, I think it's possible. Okay. So now let's kind of go to this image of the sort of next to the bridge. Can you see that over there? Can you see over there is the final edge of the bridge, right? And over there is that private road, right? And the private road actually takes you right beside that creek. Okay. I'm going to actually try and avoid comments for a while because I can anticipate people kind of reflexively saying, I'm not going to listen to this. I'm going to object and criticize and not actually, it's like, I don't want to think of the scenario telling me. I want to just criticize every part of it. So I'm going to try not to stop and address every criticism. So I think off the bridge, down the hill, and inside the vehicle are all improvements on one another. If you think about that, you go off the bridge to get out of sight, you go down the hill to also go out of sight, and you may have gone inside the vehicle to basically take control of the situation. Is anyone coming? And maybe get something out of that vehicle. It could be something like rope. It could be something like the injections that you're going to use. It could be different clothing. It could be all sorts of things. And but all of these are improvements on one another. If you think about trying to secure the victim or the victims, getting off the bridge is the first step. Going down the hill is the next step. Getting inside the vehicle is the third step. But then the perpetrator still needs to get the victims away from the private driveway. He needs to get them away from there. Why? Because at any point, someone could come along this road. So although he's in a better position off the bridge, and once off the bridge, he's in a better position when he's down the hill. And when he's down the hill, he's in a better position if he's somewhere along this. He's getting further and further from the bridge. All of those are improvements on one another. He still needs to get away from this road because that's another way someone could come across him, right? And that's why I also think it's possible he may have driven a short distance. Again, you've got to ask, well, how could he drive if they could sort of get out the vehicle and run? Maybe he could use central locking or something. Maybe he didn't drive, but I do think that a vehicle has got something to do with it at this point. I also think that the vehicle is there. That is why he wants to get Abby and Libby to that point, right? I think that's where he wants them to be because that's where his vehicle is, right? Then he needs to get away from the private driveway onto the quietest, most secure piece of property. Where is that? And I'm going to show you guys a couple of maps. So if you want to get away from this private driveway, where's the quickest route to that? So this is a map of kind of a quite a sort of a what's the word? It's a fairly broad map showing just how far it is from his home to where the bridge is, right? There's the bridge, there's the Deer Creek Trail, but it's basically just that distance. And I initially also thought that he hiked this distance or he walked that distance, but I don't think so anymore. I think that there was a vehicle, but there was also hiking involved. So there's a vehicle and hiking. For example, he needed to hike to get to the other side of the bridge in order to come kind of across the bridge, right? Songbird says, I doubt that he walked it. Okay, so that's one map that you sort of want to look at. What I'm trying to show you with this is it likely that he walked this whole distance, or is it likely that he drove some of the distance, walked some of the distance, and then drove back, right? You must remember, if you've committed double murder and there's blood on your clothes, this is a really long way to walk, and isn't someone going to notice you? It's possible that he did walk, but this is just how I'm putting the theory together. So the last thing I want to say is that I believe currently, based on where we are right now, is I believe that where he went from this point where he went from this point basically over here. He basically went straight across, right? This is not a very good angle, but he basically went almost perpendicular to this road straight across like that. In other words, he's trying to get as far away as quickly as possible, as far away from the bridge and where he was over here as possible. He's trying to get out of earshot and out of line of sight, right? Miranda says, I think he used a car at some point. Okay. So I'm going to show you a couple of maps, and this is a really frustrating part of this. So as we come to this, and this is dealing with a criticism that came up earlier, does the perpetrator carry both victims one by one across the river? It seems doubtful. You know, they're sedated and he carries them. It's possible. Why does he take them across the river? Isn't he in search of privacy and security inside the screen of the woods? Let me say that again. Why does he take them to the ultimate crime scene? Like, what is the point of that? Isn't it for privacy, number one, and number two, for security, right? And then the other alternative is, does he shepherd them both across at gunpoint, out of hearing range and out of sight? And that again brings up I think the biggest and most frustrating aspect of this whole case. And it's this. It's this question. Where is the actual crime scene? Is the crime scene below the bridge? Is it inside a vehicle? Is it at some point along the banks of the river on the south side? Or is the crime scene the crime scene? Is the crime scene where the victims' bodies were found? Is it possible the perpetrator drove them from one side of the creek to the other? Or is it possible that he shepherded them? Now, have a look at these various maps of what is supposed to be the crime scene. So this one comes from Crime Lights, right? Comes from Crime Lights. And I don't know if you guys can kind of orientate yourselves. There's the bridge, right? Okay, I guess I'm going to have to take this comment away. So there's the bridge. This clearly shows just how much of that bridge goes over that forest area, right? Because it's in summer, you can't really see the road that is going to this private property over here. But what it does show you is perpendicular to the bridge, going due, I don't want to say due north, but basically in that direction. That is supposedly where the crime scene is, right? The creek goes like that and kind of goes up to there. Now, if you look at the rest of this image, you see, and it comes from Crime Lights, you see this is the demarcated property of Ron Logan. And so that is just inside his property. But the point is, it's not on public property, it's private property. And he lives over here on the far end of this property, right? In other words, where this takes place is on the far side of this private property. That is the access road over there, or over there, but basically over there. This is the far side of that. And just to orientate yourself a little bit further, there's the cemetery, and it's kind of in a line, right? It kind of goes in a line down, and that's where the river is, and that goes perpendicularly from the bridge. Is that giving you a good sense? Now, let me ask you guys a question. Do you think that this map is accurate? When you look at this map, do you feel, yeah, that is what I thought. That's what I've been seeing in other places. Wolfie says, I think the crime scene is the main crime scene where it all happened. Not Sunshine Country Chicken says, these questions have been answered. Okay, well, you obviously are the expert here, so you should, obviously that you're on the wrong channel. Go to a channel where, you know, people know as much as you do, right? So do you guys agree what do you guys think of this map? Do you think does it correspond to the maps you guys have been looking at? Deborah says, I think it's an accurate map. Cheryl says, I'm seeing this for the first time. I can't answer. Okay. So now I'm going to show you guys another map. Is this map more accurate? Right. So here you see the bridge, and it's to me this is not a terribly this map's not as good as the previous one we looked at. I mean, it just shows a little pin for the bridge, right? Compared to that, it's a long line, right? Also, you can see the vegetation and other idiosyncrasies. So it's not a great map, but what it does show is there's that cemetery, and so where's the crime scene? Well, it's actually showing the crime scene to be there. Do you think that this is an accurate map? I found this on a media site. Yeah, Stephanie says this looks much further distance-wise. Yeah, it is much further distance-wise. So the question is, which one is accurate? The one that's a lot closer, so just that short distance. In other words, it's almost like if you could swing the bridge like that, like if you could just take the bridge and pick it up and turn it. Well, that is the distance to that point. It's not really very far, right? It's through the woods, but it's really not that far to go, right? Now, what the other map seems to be showing, you can see this goes like that. There's a slight kink. It's right next to the kink, the first kink. There's another kink over there, and it seems to be showing that the crime scene in the other map is somewhere over here, right? Let's bring that up. Yeah, it's showing the crime scene kind of over here. You see that? There's a little road coming out there. There's the road going down there. There's that second kink. That's the first kink. The other map seems to show the crime scene over there. This map shows it over there. Okay. It shows the crime scene kind of over here. And that was why I kind of started thinking that didn't he use a vehicle? Because if you take this crime scene, if you take this map of the crime scene, well, then it's quite a long distance to go. And then I thought, well, how would he get there? Well, you could take the road as far as that point, but there's a residence over here. So that theory doesn't really work either. And you couldn't go much further and try and avoid this because it goes right next to the river. So I would suggest that this is not a very good map. That this, yeah, I would say that as well. Miranda writes, how far away from the bridge were they found? Well, we don't know. We don't know exactly. But if you look at the distance of this bridge, the length of the bridge, and you look at, okay, yeah, you can get there you get a sense of the bridge, and that is supposedly how far away they were, which is to say not that far away. Maybe, I don't know, 2-3 minutes walk. But the problem is we don't have accurate data. So now I'm going to show you guys another map. This one also comes from Actus Reus. Okay, and that's the first map I want to show you. And what it shows you is the point where Abby and Libby joined the trail. So not from there, not from the Freedom Bridge side. From that point over there, that's where they were dropped off. and then they crossed the bridge, and this is where down the hill happened, right? You can see this is quite an accurate map. It's showing the cemetery in the right way. It's showing that little road coming off there. It's showing the river in quite a, not sure if this is absolutely accurate, because I think that kink in the river goes up over there. So this bridge may actually be a little bit to the left. Okay, so the map then shows the location. This is also from Actus Reus, shows it like that, right? That they headed in that direction straight across in a perpendicular to the bridge direction to that side, right? Liz Graham says, thanks for all this. Okay, so that is, like, in a weird way, one of the biggest mysteries of this case is that it's just so hard to say, okay, so where is the crime scene? And that, I think, is in my opinion, a mistake of law enforcement and a mistake of the media. Like, why wasn't this known explicitly, clearly, 5 years ago? Like, why isn't there a map from almost the next day just showing exactly where the crime scene is? Why is that part of the mystery? It shouldn't be. It's a fact. That's where it happened, kind of thing, right? So anyway, if we accept that, so anyway, I want to show you one more map, and I think this comes from the channel Morbid Reality. And so let me just show you this map. This map actually shows the crime scene on the south side of the river. What is quite good with this map is you can see another road, where you see a road over here, right? There you can see some of the properties. There you see the cemetery. And that is where the one crime scene in one of the maps is supposed to be. I don't think that is, I mean, that's on the south side now. So this is the third map giving a different location. And it's slightly different to that other location, which I think is supposed to be about here. So let's look at them in order. This is the south side map. This is the north side map, which I believe is accurate, which is the map I'm basing my scenario on, so that he didn't walk that far, right? And it's just inside the Ron Logan property line. And then there's the third one showing it just inside it, but on that side, which is, where is it? This one. So can you see we've got three different maps where the supposed crime scene are in totally different areas. And so I do think if you're going to come up with a scenario, you've got to make a decision and say, well, which one is more likely? And I think the answer is quite simple. The location where the bodies is the closest to the bridge is the most likely. Do you guys agree with that? Do you guys agree with my assumption? The crime scene that puts the bodies the closest to the bridge, in other words, the shortest distance that the perpetrator had to shepherd them, that is the most likely scenario. Do you guys agree with that? Or do you think that he went all the way through all of this brush, all the way there, or all the way there, right? So in other words, in a way, what you're saying is, if he shepherded them on foot, did they go down the hill and then just across the river over there? Or did they go a long way? They went on a long hike together, and there was a chance of being seen, but he took that risk. What do you guys think? So a lot of you guys say you agree. Okay, good. So we're on the same page. Okay. So now I want to share with you a few things that are important, that are facts, and a couple of things that I've learned, right? So this is something I came across in the Indy Star. Some of you may know this. Some of you may not know this. Let me ask you the question, though. First of all, do you think DNA was found at the crime scene? Let's see what you guys say. Yeah, I agree with that. Agree with that. Agree with that. Agree with that. Also agree with that. Okay. Do you think DNA, or do you know whether DNA was found at the crime scene? Let's see what you guys say. Yes, 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 yes. Okay, so here's confirmation of that, in a sense. At every crime scene, you're going to have DNA. We're still working on identifying all of the DNA that we have, said Sergeant Holman, right? So what that is telling you is that they do have DNA, but they're not quite sure what it means. We are still working on identifying all the DNA that we have there. And I think that has been subsequently confirmed. Yeah, they do have DNA. So let me ask you a question based on this. How do you think they can be so sure that Richard Allen committed this crime? How do you think they can be so sure that Richard Allen committed this crime? In other words, there's got to be something that connects him to the crime, right? So you might say that he was on certain kinds of social media, that the internet trail says this or that, but that didn't take that they didn't arrest Keegan Klein, right? I'm saying hypothetically there might be some sort of internet breadcrumb trail that is associated with Richard Allen, but that wasn't enough to nail Keegan Klein. So what do they have on the perpetrator that is different to what they have on Keegan Klein? GMA says he kept trophies. That's a good point. Carter said something. Deborah says they may have found either DNA or some other evidence. So anyway, what I'm kind of trying to get at is they did find DNA at the scene, and we're going to come back to that. What if Richard Allen's DNA matched the DNA at the crime scene? The Humble Grower says, you and your members do a great job analyzing these cases. Thanks a lot for that. Okay. Okay, cool. So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. The other one is, did you guys know this? Well, before I put it up, where do you think Libby's phone was found? Because while I was putting together the scenario, one scenario that I've had in my mind for a long time was, as soon as they kind of went down the hill, one of the girls cut loose, and there was kind of a scenario of chasing after someone, and maybe Libby threw a phone aside, or there was some kind of, what's the word, some kind of struggle, right? But if you're going to come up with a scenario like that, which sounds reasonable, sounds realistic, you've also got to ask a very simple question. Where was Libby's phone actually found? Was it found near the bridge? Because if that's the case, well, then that scenario doesn't work. Also, we know that there were no defensive wounds. There weren't any signs of a struggle. So it doesn't seem like Libby did run away. And, right, so who knows where. Okay, so Daniela says, I think Libby's phone is found on her or near her. Well, I'm not going to say what SM Kowalinsky says because you've read the script, and I know you have. Catherine Wall says, in the river. I heard under the leaves near the crime scene. Okay, so all of that's right. Sergeant Holman tells us investigators recovered audio from Libby's phone found with the girls at the crime scene. Okay. So now we're going to kind of deviate a little bit from the scenario and just deal with a couple of issues. if the girls were sedated, why was it necessary to be violent? I'm talking about if you were controlling them with a gun, and then you sedated them, and then whatever happened. Why was it necessary to be violent? Why was it necessary that blood be spilled? Right? What is the point of that? And one of the things I considered was in the John Benet Ramsey ransom note, you kind of have a situation where what happened to John Benet was bad enough, but what's in the ransom note actually makes it 10 times worse. She was kidnapped, she may be beheaded, all of that kind of thing, right? In other words, the ransom note pretends that things are 1,000 times worse. Thanks a lot, humble grower. The ransom note pretends that things are 1,000 times worse, but in order to distract you from what is actually going on there. And so I think there's a possibility that the bloodshed was done after the fact in order to create this situation where you might think it's a random act, and that the point of it wasn't, in other words, the point of this crime wasn't the point of the crime. So you say, what was the point of the crime? Wasn't the point of the crime luring two girls into a situation where somebody then took advantage of them in a particularly predatory way for something particular, for some sort of sexual thing, right? And so doesn't the blood and that aspect of violence, doesn't that cloud over in the same way that the ransom note does that? Isn't that how the misdirection is brought about, right? That was just one of my thoughts. The other thing is the fact that a souvenir is taken, right? To me, what's quite astonishing about this whole crime is it's quite brazen. The guy walking across the bridge, allowing them to see him from a distance, which in a way allows him to be videoed and recorded, and then he commits the crime anyway, is quite brazen. There's something crazy slash brazen or bold about this perpetrator, right? You could even say it's amateurish, but you could also say, so the fact that he takes a souvenir, right? And can you see what it says here in this section from the affidavit? It says the souvenirs taken to fashion, memorialize a crime scene, of photos, electronic or digital methods to download onto computers, for later viewing, scanning, or copying, right? And we know that Jeffrey Dahmer did exactly the same thing. Jeffrey Dahmer also he felt like, well, this is such a precious moment, and so I need something where I can relive this moment, right? And so what did he do? He also took photos. He also kept souvenirs, right? And I don't know why, but I keep coming back to Jeffrey Dahmer. There are certain similarities, although I don't think that the Delphi killer is a serial killer, right? I don't think the Delphi killer is a serial killer. What I think they have in common, Dahmer and the Delphi killer, is a high level of fantasy, a high level of taboo fantasy, certainly in their minds, and that then leads to committing a crime in a way that the actual person disappears. The fantasy takes over to such an extent that the person becomes invisible and the person doesn't even need to be there. There's also this idea of sedating someone or turning them kind of into a zombie, because all I really want is their body. All I really want is access to this body, right? All I really want is this fantasy that I've had about bodies. Now I want this fantasy with a real body, right? You get that. the main difference between Jeffrey Dahmer and the Delphi killer, I believe, is, first of all, Jeffrey Dahmer's fantasy level was far more extreme. Like he wanted to do things with viscera and all sorts of other things. That's the one aspect. The other thing is he was far more isolated, so far more ANAL, and that's far more sadistic. And I mean that's the other part, is he lived alone. He didn't really have a family, whereas the Delphi killer, I don't think his fantasies were as extreme. They were extreme, but not as extreme. I don't think what he wanted to do was as taboo, but it was taboo as well. And then also, I don't think it was as isolated or excluded from a family dynamic, as lonely as Jeffrey Dahmer was. Does that make sense? Stephanie says maybe they found photos in his possession. Okay. So that is not a bad question to ask. You know, could they have found photos? And the reason is because when you're dealing with someone who's addicted to pornography, then they are collecting photos, they're collecting images, they're collecting visuals, right? They're collecting, yeah. And so this is, if you think about it, this crime that was committed is almost I don't know, I mean, it's a terrible way to express it, to say this was the highlight of their career in terms of that, in terms of their fantasy, but it's the peak in their journey. And so why would they not want photos of that, right? Do you follow the criminal psychology? I know it's a very objectionable way of saying it, but do you see what I'm saying? So Koi Cat says there are rumors of photos. We're going to come back to this idea of photos, but bear in mind the whole fabric of this case is to do with the internet and phones and digital devices and luring. And then, I mean, even the fact that Bridge Guy is caught on video and audio, you kind of get this idea that it's about footage, that the girls are about footage. They go on Instagram and they see pictures of a nice kid and cars and all sorts of things. But the person on the other side is equally caught up in footage and pictures and things going on, right? You follow? Amy Hall, thanks for joining us. Okay. Stephanie says, I meant photos of the crime scene or posed bodies. Yeah, I think that's also possible. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's also what I'm talking about. It's in the same way as the Dahmer case. He took photos and posed them. And that's actually how they knew instantly that they caught someone who was responsible for something really nefarious. I mean, his own photos, basically, it was case closed. So to me, the souvenir reveals the first clue in terms of the scale of perversion. He doesn't just commit a crime, he needs to take something from it. So a quick scan through of Ron Logan's probable cause affidavit reveals the following key terms: cell phone, blood, video, image, heavy, that the perpetrator is quite heavy, woods, souvenir, staging, also hiking, that he's moving or transferring. I'm not sure if that's necessarily in the affidavit, but hiking is part of the story, that somebody moves across countryside, moves across terrain, moves across a river. Think about this aspect. Moving and transferring. So you have the same thing going on as the bridge before the crime, right? So let me bring up that other image. Let me bring that up. think about the psychological thing that's going on here. So first of all, there's the physical crossing of this bridge, right? So going from this side to that side, there's a physical crossing of this bridge. Let me bring it up like that. But that is then followed by a psychological movement from a point over here, over there, to the crime scene. This distance from here to there is where the premeditation reaches kind of a critical mass. So what I'm trying to say is somebody fantasized about this, someone premeditated this. While he was walking across the bridge, he was thinking about it, but while he was literally with them, it's now you can almost like taste that sense of adrenaline. The excitement is building up in a obviously in a disgusting criminal sense, right? All of that is coming to the surface, right? You can imagine him being very electrified with adrenaline because he knows what he's about to do, right? There's this terrible, giddy sense of something huge and permanent that is about to take place. That is another bridge that is crossed that mirrors this bridge. It's not a real bridge, it's a psychological bridge. But what happens is they just crossed the river, like above ground in sight. Now they're going to cross that same river again, unseen, out of sight, and that's where a crime's going to take place. Can you see how there's a weird psychological inversion going on? Yeah, we are walking somewhere and it's all very nice, it's all very normal. Well, the next thing we're going to walk somewhere else and things aren't nice and they aren't normal. Now I'm in control. Now I am going to exert power. Now I'm going to access all of this stuff that has been building up, right? Now I'm going to entertain all of those impulses in the real world. But I want to do it out of sight, not on the top of the bridge, but under the bridge, like the troll, right? So think about all of that and think about, do you still think that there's an accomplice? Do you think that there's a person holding Bridge Guy's hand and saying, yeah, let's do this? Think about that and think about, can you imagine a person participating with Jeffrey Dahmer in what Jeffrey Dahmer was doing, right? Part of the mechanism of why this is taking place to begin with is because these guys are loners and lone wolves and lonely, because there's a space in that loneliness, that emptiness that they need to fill, right? If you take that loneliness and emptiness away, then they become, or they should hopefully become balanced, normal people. But as long as that emptiness, loneliness, disconnectedness is there, it needs to be filled in some way. And look at how they have chosen to fill it, right? So think about the following. Jeffrey Dahmer would he have an accomplice? Jeffrey Dahmer has so many fantasies, and how those fantasies end up leading to physical destruction over and over again. So in other words, the physical destruction, if you reverse engineer it, it comes back to fantasy. The same thing happened in the Chris Watts case. You had this horrible destruction of kind of the bird-like bodies of his children going into the oil tanks. What is behind all of that? Why wasn't he thinking like a proper human being? Because he was caught up in fantasy with someone he was having an affair with. Deborah says, I think he was alone. Think about what is going on here is, so you might say, what? But why did he commit this crime? It's because of this. Impotence versus power. It's because something in this place of impotence and weakness, the sexual impulse is kind of weaponized that to say, this is the way out of impotence, is that through a sexual through a particular sexual manifestation, you can achieve personal power, you can achieve personal agency, right? In other words, in my life, I feel helpless, impotent, weak. I feel like a wallflower. I feel like I don't have any agency. I feel insignificant. I feel unhappy. I feel whatever, frustrated. Well, through this kind of corridor, this dimension of a particular sexual, I don't want to say orientation, that just sounds too normal. Deviance is a route to addressing all of those problems. This is a way back to power. This is a way back to control. This is a way back to feeling good. This is a way back to feeling, in this particular person's case, like, I guess, a man. This is a way back to potency, right? And right next to that, there is a need to see blood and destruction. Why is there a need to see that? Because in order, in how can I put it? With Jeffrey Dahmer, you kind of had a situation of someone who feels impotent and weak and powerless. So what happens when someone dies and is helpless, and that perpetrator's got complete custody over that person's remains, right? And can kind of do whatever they want with them, as disgusting as that is. What he gets out of that is a power rush, which feels sexual to him. He's excited by that. The thing that disgusts most of us, not only the crime itself, but also death. In a very bizarre way, even the smell of death disgusts most of us. I think that smell actually gave Dharma a sense of, wow, you're with me, you're a companion. In other words, somehow he's transcended that disgust, which is a healthy impulse, that death isn't a nice thing, that dead bodies aren't nice things, that you don't want to, that blood is scary and something you don't want to, how can I put it? You don't want to bring that about. Someone who's totally impotent may feel, in order to see that I'm powerful, in order to feel that I'm powerful, in order to manifest that, I need to see a body breaking and opening and all that kind of thing. I need to see under the surface. Like my whole life has been, I'm a wallflower, I'm a spectator, and I want to get through that surface, right? Yeah, no, that's totally true. I mean, it is exactly that. Power over a 13, it's not very impressive. And that's kind of the next point. The sort of man that preys on children is by definition a weak man. So that's already telling you something, right? In terms of criminal psychology, in terms of profiling, from a mile away, the sort of man that is doing this is a weak man. His identity is not fully formed. He's got trouble relating to power and control in his social setup. He is a crushed-in individual. And because of all of these defects, he's a loner. He may feel like he's a loser. He also chooses to be a loner. And that makes everything worse. And then he kind of tries to get relief from that by looking at certain images, right? The other thing that I don't know whether it's a huge epiphany or not, but I was kind of thinking where I wrote an identity that is not fully formed. Your mom says, do you think he did this before? I don't think he did. Quite a strange avatar, your mom. But in terms of an identity that is not fully formed, think about this idea that he actually borrows another identity, borrows Anthony Shots. And why does he need to do that? Well, because who he is isn't good enough, and he knows it. Who he is in the real world, but even in the online avatar world, isn't good enough he's actually borrowing an avatar somebody else cobbled together. That's the impression I get. So even the fake avatar he made, you could even argue wasn't good enough. And so that is how weak he is just trying to find some way to exist in the world and have some agency. And unfortunately, finds a sick way of achieving that goal. Okay. So he borrows the online identity of someone else. So let me ask you a question. How does all of that feel? How does it feel like you can't be yourself? I mean, Chris Watts said that, I couldn't be myself around Shanann. And it felt quite sexy to be himself with Nicole Kessinger. How does it feel that you've got to borrow someone else's identity in order for someone to communicate with you and kind of recognize you? Well, the answer is it feels quite invalidating. It feels not nice. It feels like it's confirmation that you are nobody and a nothing. But what do you think happens when this person who feels so invalidated actually comes into contact now with Abby and Libby? Do you think he still pretends to be someone else? Well, now he can at last shed the sheep's clothing that has been so constricting. Do you see what I'm saying? He's been wearing the sheep's clothing all the time, and it's a burden in itself. It is uncomfortable. It's ridiculous. And but he wears the sheep's clothing. It's like the fox guarding the hen house. He wears the sheep's clothing in order to broker a scenario where he can meet them. But as soon as he does meet them, do you think that he keeps that clothing on? No, he doesn't. He can't wait to shed it. So he tears open the sheep's clothing and exposes who he really is, a wolf, right? And what does a wolf do? A wolf is also engaged in tearing things apart in the same way that the wolf emerges by tearing apart the sheep's clothing. It's kind of that same psychology, almost getting revenge on the world for diminishing him, right? Thanks a lot, Becky. Daniela says, how does one get to the point where they are comfortable in such gore and violence? It's years and years of exposure to being fueled, being supplied by images and things that are inappropriate. That's really what it is. It's years and years of being antisocial, right? Okay, so let me continue. Do you guys remember this map? Now, I don't really know where this map comes from. It was sent to me by Lisa in California. I've got an idea it actually comes from Gray Hughes. And the first time I saw this map, I couldn't make too much sense out of it, or I wasn't quite sure if it was accurate. I actually thought that the bridge came up to here and that he went further along here. This is based on other maps. But now I actually think that this is accurate. I do think that he basically went straight across. Let me bring it to the sort of full size. I think that he did basically go straight, there's down the hill, but basically went straight across to the crime scene, right? Straight across. And then I think he, after committing the crime, he went back across and went to his vehicle and then drove home with his souvenir. Do you guys agree with that? Do you guys agree that this was the route of the lone wolf, was that they crossed a bridge down the hill, went basically straight across the river here? That's the crime scene right on the periphery of Ron Logan's property, the far corner. Committed the crime there, maybe took photos, took souvenirs, did something diabolical, then crossed back through the river, which would have washed some of the evidence off of him, and then went some route wherever his car was parked and then went home. A few of you say that makes sense. Okay, so let's bring this up. Wounds caused by a something weapon, large amount of blood was lost, victim's wounds, the perpetrator would have gotten blood on his clothing. So my first question is regarding this issue of blood. Why was there so much blood at the scene? Is this a sexual crime, a violent crime, or a combination? What do you guys think of that based on what you've just spoken about? That's such a great answer. That's such a great answer. I think it's exactly the same thing with Jeffrey Dahmer. It was really about power. I think the central thing when someone is really chronically lonely, when someone is desperately, desperately alone, and they don't really have relationships with society, with family, they don't really have a lot of friends, they don't actually have intimate relationships, then because we're social animals, because people are social animals, if we weren't social animals, if we were like cats, it wouldn't bother us being lonely. Or if we were psychopaths, or I don't know, certain individuals that there are certain people who just love numbers or whatever it is, that loneliness isn't a problem. But for most of us, because we are social animals, a dog is a social animal. Dogs don't like being left alone. If you leave a dog alone for a long time, if you don't socialize the dog, they're going to develop all sorts of problems. But basically, with a human being, if they are disconnected, if they are isolated, if they're alone, if they don't have relationships, if they, all of these things compound and compound and compound, what happens at the end of the day? Well, they feel impotent. They feel like they don't belong in society. They don't have any status. They don't have any power. What power are we talking about? Do they not have muscles? Do they not have strength? No, it's not that kind of power. It's social power. It's sexual power. It's agency, one person having agency compared to another person. And so through this sexual thing, through this animalistic thing, that agency is kind of stolen, right? It's not real agency, it's stolen agency. And that's exactly what Jeffrey Dahmer did. He stole agency for a very short time, tried to preserve it. And then, of course, that person has died, and then he must do it all over again. And that was what he was, in a way, addicted to, was this thirst for instant power. Of course, as instantly as it came, it also went. And he was trying to find a way to make that power, what's the word, stay. And taking photos was one strategy, keeping bones was another strategy, eating, as disgusting as that is, was another strategy. These were all attempts to try and hold on to power, but it was a slippery grip on power, and not really a real power either. So that's just another reference to Jeffrey Dahmer. So if you're asking, what is going on with this individual going after these two teenagers, is trying to steal agency. He can't get it in the real world, so he's got to take it by force. And he really needs it, right? So having sketched that out, do you guys really need me to contrast a potential multi-person scenario? Like, do you feel like what I've sketched is likely and realistic, or do you sort of feel No, no, no. I actually think there was a second person there. Let's entertain that idea, or let's you guys feel like we've moved closer to the lone wolf thing being credible, or do you sort of feel no, I'm not really convinced? How do you sort of feel about that? Yeah, that's well, that is exactly it, and he also knows it. I mean, um, wanting to say something, not being able to say something, being a wallflower is basically your entire life is cowardice. He only steps forward, he only comes out of the woods when they're two little teenagers who are completely alone, and he's got a gun and he's got all the power. I mean, that's exactly what it is. Okay, so I'm not really going to, thanks a lot, guys. So I'm not really going to go into the other scenario, just to say, in another scenario, you could almost imagine that there could be a vehicle. Let's try and bring up that map again. Um, okay, let's do it like that. So in a hypothetical multi, in like in a two perpetrator scenario, one thing you could imagine is that the one perpetrator is here and his job is to get the victims to the other perpetrator, right? And you could kind of imagine that if the other perpetrator was over there, close, quite close to a road, and or over there, quite close to a road, that there was a second perpetrator. In other words, the one perpetrator may arrive by vehicle over here, and maybe he's the what's the word? He's the sidekick of the main perpetrator. And the main perpetrator may be very overweight or old or whatever it is. And the job of the sidekick perpetrator is to get the victims to the principal perpetrator. So the principal perpetrator is less mobile and I don't know, maybe older, maybe heavier or something. And so he's going to be closer to another vehicle. So you can actually imagine that there are two vehicles in a scenario like that, right? So you could have a vehicle coming from the north where the principal perpetrator is, or there's no vehicle, it's just where Ron Logan lives, right? Or and then there's a second vehicle where the second perpetrator comes from, and he basically takes them where they want them to be, and then they, in a concerted fashion, um, do something, right? That's the that's an alternate scenario. I just don't think it's very realistic, because by nature these kinds of deviant um, ideas are, what's the word, private, for lack of a better word, taboo, but part of that private, right? Okay. Cynthia says, I don't think he was legally driving. Okay. Right. So as soon as you entertain the idea of a more than one perpetrator, then you can actually see how extreme violence escalates. In other words, you've got now double the amount of violence and double the amount of other sort of activity. But even if you entertain that, were the police ever saying we're looking for two men? Didn't you get the impression that all along the police seemed to be looking for one person, bridge guy? Wasn't there the perception that the police were looking for a killer, not killers? And I think that raises the other question, which is, I think, quite an interesting factual question. is how many DNA profiles are there? You might also say how many viable profiles are there, and also where are these profiles? Yeah, I don't think they've ever said killers, right? So you kind of get the idea that the police felt we're looking for one person. So remember we spoke previously. I said to you, where in the previous live dealing with the Delphi case, I said, where does the pendulum go? Is it very extreme or is it less extreme, this crime? Because we don't know what the autopsy results are. We don't actually know what happened. Where along this thing is the pendulum? And I think quite a good way of thinking about it in a very basic way is, are we dealing with Chris Watts? Right? With the Chris Watts case, there were also two little girls. It's a triple homicide effectively, but involving two little girls. Or more than that? Are we actually dealing with a serial killer? Are we dealing with someone extremely evil? Right? What are we actually dealing with here? Are we dealing with Chris Watts level criminality, or are we dealing with Jeffrey Dahmer? What do you guys say? What do you guys say? Chris Watts or Jeffrey Dahmer in terms of extreme? In your mind, how extreme do you think this crime is? Closer to Chris Watts or closer to Jeffrey Dahmer? Sassy says neither. Cash doesn't seem to know who Chris Watts is. Zircon says Jeffrey, okay. Tracy says a mixture of both. Terry says Dahmer. Quite a few say Dahmer. Run the World says in between. Ashley Lawson says Chris Watts, okay. Love God so much says neither, all killers are unique. Yeah, but if you had to choose, if you didn't have a choice and it was just Chris Watts, we're measuring it against Chris Watts and Jeffrey Dahmer. Is this crime closer to this one or that one? Deborah says Chris Watts. So let's have a look. Elsie, Elise says Dahmer. Stephanie says Watts. Susan says Watts. Lorna says Watts. Cheryl says Dahmer. Miss Jane says Watts. Songbird says Jeffrey. SM Kovalinsky says Dahmer. Sorry, not Dahmer, Watts. So in my opinion, it is, I'm not talking about the type of crime. I'm not talking about the psychology so much. I'm talking about the scale of it, the level of sadism, right? I think it's far closer to Chris Watts than it is to Jeffrey Dahmer. Far, far, far closer. That's my opinion. Then I think another question to raise, and if you feel, you know what, I think you're totally wrong, it's far more like Jeffrey Dahmer. There definitely are similarities, right? There's the fantasy element and other things, impotency. I don't know whether Chris Watts felt impotent in a sexual sense. I do think he felt impotent in another sense. Whereas I think Jeffrey Dahmer may have felt impotent in a sexual sense. And I think this perpetrator felt somewhat impotent in a sexual sense. But in a way, the sexual thing may be between Chris Watts, because it's his own animal, between Chris Watts and Jeffrey Dahmer. He's if it is Richard Allen, it's someone who's married with a child, who's not totally impotent, but there is a impotency aspect to what's going on here. So let me ask you this question and think about the Chris Watts, Jeffrey Dahmer spectrum, right? Um, do you think this case, remember we addressed this right in the beginning. I said, do you think it was a lone wolf? And some of you said, yeah, but I think he had an accessory. In terms of the crime scene itself, I think that he was a lone wolf. But in terms of the broader fabric, the online thing, do you think that there was someone else involved in this case? Do you think the Delphi crimes, the Delphi murders involved someone else, either explicitly or implicitly? Stephanie says yes. So if you think about Chris Watts, did that case involve someone explicitly or implicitly? Did he commit a crime because of another person, in a sense? Was there someone else floating in the background, someone else in his head that was to some extent pulling psychological strings, right? So in a sense, I think that is kind of true, although totally different in another sense, that someone was possibly part of the fabric of putting fantasies in place. Of course, with Nicole Kessinger, Chris Watts is directly fantasizing about her, but it's possible that Keegan Klein, I don't know, it's possible that Keegan Klein set up fantasy, set up a fantasy channel, set up a fantasy world, set up access, or what can one call it? Accounts, set up a route to fantasy. So he's not having fantasies about Keegan Klein, but it's via Keegan Klein. In other words, through that mechanism, you could have possibly implicit or explicit involvement, if that makes sense. So now I want to take things in a slightly different direction. When I talk about this, what do you call it? When I talk about this implicit thing, I suppose you could call it the Fisher King scenario. You could even turn that into a true crime rocket science ism. What I mean by the Fisher King scenario, it's where someone is effectively an accessory, or they are an what's the word? A triggering agent. How else can I put it? Somebody does something that facilitates the criminal psychology, right? In Nicole Kessinger's case, I personally don't think Nicole Kessinger wanted Chris Watts to do what he did, but she nevertheless, in terms of Chris Watts, may have facilitated certain ideas, if that makes sense, right? In the same way, in a Fisher King scenario, you have a situation in the Fisher King movie. You had a guy who was a radio host. I don't know if you've seen the movie. He's a radio host who made some sort of sly, reckless comments about society, and the person listening was kind of a loner who took those comments literally, and then went to a restaurant. This is in terms of the story, and committed a crime. Right? I'm going to play you a short clip out of that. But what I'm trying to say is, in that fictional thing, it is a scenario where the radio host didn't really mean any harm, but he nevertheless, his how can I put it, his words, his thoughts had an impact on another person, which then facilitated or led to a particular action taking place. Do you guys remember that from the Fisher King? Welcome to our new member. Thanks a lot, Cash. Okay. So I'm going to play you a quick clip from the Fisher King. Just give me a second and then we'll get to it. Okay, there we go. Can you guys see that? This is a clip from the Fisher King. So basically what happened was he was doing a radio show and he kind of said something offhand, and that led to one of his listeners acting literally on what he heard and then committing a horrible crime. And it's really an incredible movie, but he feels really guilty about that, and he actually changes who he is as a result of this terrible thing that takes place. He wants to kind of make up for this horrible tragedy that took place that he is not really responsible for, but he kind of is. Now, I want you to think of two sort of things. The one is try and think of Keegan Kline in the same sort of thing. Is he's almost like a radio host. Obviously, it's totally different, but in the sense of a broadcaster, someone who's sending messages out, but he doesn't really know who his audience is. And ultimately, someone in that audience does something, right? Doesn't that person then know that they were responsible? It's a question. Do they know they were responsible? Should they know they were responsible? Are they responsible? And obviously, there have been no charges brought against him, so I guess technically he's not responsible. But ethically, is he responsible? Morally, is he responsible? Legally, is he responsible? Maybe not. It doesn't appear to be. Okay, so I just want to play you another clip from the same thing. Is it? Yeah, okay, so that's it. So this is the moment that Jack finds out that what has happened. And so isn't that also how Keegan Kline reacted? Remember we spoke about it yesterday, or whenever it was, the previous live, that he said it was a wake-up call. Well, wasn't it truly a wake-up call, just as it was in this case? The movie is called The Fisher King. You're not serious. There's no sound. Oh, oh. Let's try all of that again. Really frustrating. Sorry, I'm not quite 100% today.
Mark Safran, Channel 7 News.
Fuck.
Right, so that was his reaction after it came onto the news. So let me play the other part that you guys didn't hear. Sorry about the sort of technical issues.
Edwin, they must be stopped before it's too late. It's us or them.
It was Mr. Lucas's offhand remark that seemed to have fatal impact on Mr. Melnick. Mark Saffron is on the scene.
An after-work hotspot.
Okay, so I've sketched this in. This is from the Fisher King, right? And this is where he realizes he's watching the news and he realizes something he said in passing. Someone else took that and totally interpreted it literally and did something that he certainly didn't intend, right? And he's totally devastated by this. Like his entire life is totally devastated by how someone, out of all his listeners, one particular listener took what he put out there literally, and you know, to that effect. And I'm trying to compare that to Keegan Klein pushing sort of messages out, and someone in that audience also taking that extremely literally, in a sense.
Babbitt's is popular with single young professionals. Edwin Malnick arrived at the peak hour of 7:15, took one long look at the handsome collection of the city's best and brightest, then removed a shotgun from his overcoat and opened fire. Lucas expressed regret. However, no formal comment has been made. Neighbors of Malnick said he was a quiet man who lived alone. He scarcely knew he was there, said a woman who lived next door to Malnick for 11 years. But today...
So I just thought that was quite relevant just in terms of what I'm trying to convey here. So now we're going to deal with Robert Ives' statement. He was the Carroll County prosecutor. And I want to thank SM Kowalinsky for putting this on my radar. Have any of you heard of Robert Ives? Any of you heard about him? Cool. Okay. So there are a couple of yeps, a couple of nopes. Those who say nope, you're going to find this quite interesting. So we are now going to refer to a couple of interesting articles. See if I can find them again. There they are. So the original source for this article is HLN Down the Hill. You can listen to the signatures episode. It's episode 5. It says, in February 2017, Robert Ives was the prosecuting attorney in Carroll County, Indiana. His perspective at the crime scene and understanding cast some brand new light on the murders of Abby and Libby, right? So if you guys want to listen to that yourselves, it's from the Down the Hill podcast. I'm sure many of you know about that. So that's the first thing. The other thing is, this is the transcript of the signatures episode, Robert Ives' interview. This is a transcript of that interview, and I'm going to be highlighting certain sections from that transcript. Okay. Okay, are you guys with me? So Robert Ives was the prosecutor. He's now a former prosecutor, but he actually went to the crime scene. So we can get certain additional information / inferences from what he says. Okay. So this was sent to me. Look at what is underlined over here. It was just not your normal, a person was killed here crime scene. That's probably all I can say about it. Let me take that away. Can you see that over there underlined in red? That is what Robert Ives said. It was just not your normal, a person was killed here crime scene. What do you think he means by that? Okay, now we're going to deal with this excerpt from Crime Lights. Okay, we're going to deal with that excerpt. So just to give you an idea, Robert Ives was the Indiana's chief prosecutor during the Delphi murders when that occurred. Crime Lights writes over here that he's extremely smart and well-spoken. Let's just put the link in one more time. So according to the person dealing with this whole thing, he was extremely smart, and he supplies some of the best insight into the inner workings of the case to date. Okay. So we feel like we're in quite good hands. We're with a really smart expert who provides great insight. He was actually at the crime scene, and we're now going to find out a bit about that. Wolfie says they said 3 signatures. Wonder what they are. Yeah, that is a good question. Okay. Now, bear in mind, this is what he said. I think it was in March 2017. Okay. So he was asked, maybe, because he basically said, I can't talk to you about the details. This is an active investigation. I can't talk about it. Then the host said to him, maybe you can answer in a more general way. Tell us about the crime scene. And then he said this, which really stood out to me. He said, he compared it to a case, the very first case he handled, where someone was shot, and he said he pinned her up against the refrigerator, shot in the back of the head. She fell on the floor. He shot twice more in the chest. And then he says this, you had a dead person. You had a dead person with 3 bullets in them. They were dead. He was seen at the scene, you know, things like that. All I can say about the situation with Abby and Libby is that there was a lot more physical evidence than at that crime scene. So kind of what he's saying there is, number one, there was a heck of a lot of physical evidence at that crime scene. We know there was staging. We know there's probably some alteration to the scene, but he's basically saying there was a orgy of evidence in terms of this case. The other thing that I find interesting is he's talking about someone who was shot, which makes you wonder, was that present in this case? And to be honest, I'm not sure if I think it was. Like, I think someone may have heard something. Someone may have heard a shot going off. We also know that per the probable cause affidavit, it seems to refer to a sharp object was used. So, but the thing is, this prosecutor is referring to someone shot. So it makes you wonder, is that why it resonates with him? Why does this case that he brings up, out of all the cases he could bring up, why does he bring up this case? I think it's not because of that. I think it's because of where he says, pinned her up against the refrigerator. So I think that's part of it, that someone is kind of propped up. And I think the other part is that they were possibly killed or something happened to them post-mortem, that there was sort of overkill involved, if that makes sense. I mean, if you think of the Jeffrey Dahmer cases and victims, he didn't just kill them, he consumed them. He didn't just kill them, he dismembered them, right? So you sort of feel like something else happened here where they weren't simply killed. And I have said before that I wonder whether the violence was meant to camouflage something else that was taking place. But it could also be just with Jeffrey Dahmer, the same thing, that person wanted access to, I want to see the inside of this person's body. You know, that could also be the case. But basically what he's saying here is they were dead, you had a dead person with 3 bullets in them. In other words, why is there overkill? What's going on there? And I think it's got to do with impotency and frustration and anger and things like that. Okay. Then he also talks about the signature. Then there's another question where he's asked, can you think of any other cases that are like this? And I just want to highlight this, is where he said, I think it was probably someone local. And so he got that right very early on. But then he said, I think it was a random murder and maybe it was a serial killer. I don't agree with that at all. I don't think it was random and I don't think it's a serial killer. That's my opinion. So as smart and eloquent and as educated as this guy was, and the fact that he went to the crime scene, I don't agree with that. I don't know what you guys think. I don't think it was random and I don't think it's a serial killer. But I do think it was someone local. Okay. Cool. Okay, so let's continue. Then he was asked, did you think we're going to get this wrapped up? Did you think we're going to catch him? And I just want to highlight this section where he said, there was a lot of physical evidence of one sort or another. And then he said, it never led to a particular person. So I was surprised. I am surprised. I thought we would figure out who did it. And that kind of corresponds to this same comment here. Where is it? That sort of statement where he says, there was a lot of physical evidence. I was surprised. I thought we would figure out who did it. That is similar to what he says here. So he's asked something, and then he responds by saying, of course, for the police, that's what stunned. How can we not figure out who this is? How are you going to have video and audio of a person about to commit a crime and not being able to figure out who it is? And I must say, that was my reaction to the Delphi case. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. They've got video of the guy, they've got audio of the guy, and they can't catch him. Like, what's the deal with that? How can you have video and audio and you still can't catch the guy? Okay, so let's go through a couple of other points that he makes. So another point that he made was this one. So he's asked, was the physical evidence you're talking about, was that one of the reasons why there seemed to be a feeling that it would be a few days and they would solve the case? And so he responds basically saying, as I say, the fact that there was plenty of physical evidence, it wasn't very mysterious. There wasn't a lot that they didn't know. He says, how do I say it? This person was killed. This person was killed with a gun. Well, there's more to it than that. That's all I'm saying. So kind of cryptic. And I think that does raise the question, were they killed with a gun? He keeps mentioning a gun, but were they killed with a gun? Weren't they more likely killed with a sharp object, which would make for a silent killing if they sedated? And same thing with Jeffrey Dahmer, a silent killing and a lot of blood. Let me ask you a kind of a silly question. let me ask you a really silly question. Why didn't the killer take the girls home like Dahmer did with his victims? Why wouldn't he just get them at the bridge and take them home? Yeah, because he's got a family. He's got a wife and daughter. Jeffrey Dahmer didn't have a family, didn't have a wife and daughter, he didn't have a boyfriend, he didn't have really friends either. That was his cave. No one else went there. His only problem was a somewhat nosy neighbor, right? So that's quite distinctive here, is that there's no, that he's got to, you kind of get the sense he's got to commit the crime outside. And he's got some hiking experience, possibly. So that brings us to the next point. Let's do that. So one thing, this is from Andrew from HLN, one thing that Sergeant Bradley told us was the crime scene was complicated. What does that mean? So he said, I've only dealt with a few murder cases, but generally a crime scene has been in a room. It's been in a place. I don't recall one that had a big outdoor circumstance away from a house. And so he says the crime scene is unquestionably contaminated. Now, we know that they only found the girls the very next day. The crime happened, and that's also quite an interesting question. From what time to what time did the crime take place? Was it 2 till 3 or 2 till 5? Or, what was the situation? What time would his wife have gotten home from work? Where was his wife that day? But the problem is that an entire afternoon, evening, and then next morning went by. And so the crime scene was contaminated by time and by probably insects and possibly even animals. And then he does say most crime scenes are contaminated to a certain extent. It reminds me a little bit of the West Memphis 3 case, which I've also written a book about. The book's called King of Freaks, where those 3 boys were also found around about 24 hours later, all in water, but also in an outdoor setting. Okay. Police spoke of a shed, yeah. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. I'm just sort of highlighting, so this deals with DNA. So he's asked, on the subject of DNA, what can you tell us? And so he says, so again, it's hard to know whether he's saying this because he went to the scene and he's talking about what he saw there, or whether he's actually going laterally away, dealing with other cases that is he dealing very intertextually or broadly intertextually. So he actually brings up DNA from semen. He says, I mean semen, and the DNA from semen is tremendous evidence. But you have to have that, and then you have to have somebody you can identify it with. And that is why I said early on, could it be that they found that kind of DNA, and so they had incredible evidence that they just needed to connect it with someone, and isn't the answer that they did? Is the smoking gun in this case DNA from semen? Blood DNA is tremendous evidence because the perpetrators of crimes often leave their blood at crime scenes for a variety of reasons. So there could also be blood in this case. Often when a knife is used, people can cut themselves. I think we saw that in the Jodi Arias case, where she had a very bad cut on her finger, right? So there's a really good example of a knife being wielded and the person wielding it actually being cut, because the knife becomes very greasy and slippery, right? And then he also refers to DNA may be on their clothing right at the end there, right? So again, it's quite difficult to tell what he's getting at. Is there semen in this case? Is there DNA on clothing? I think the answer is there is DNA. It's hard to imagine with a sexual crime that there wouldn't be that sort of DNA. So we'll see. Miss Jane says, I think he wore gloves, DNA under fingernails. Yeah, but if you sedated, I don't know if that would be the case. I think that as well. Yeah, that's a good point. That's also a good point. Focus your camera. Isn't it focused? Was it not focused? Okay, so was this premeditated? Was this case premeditated? Robert Ives thinks it wasn't, but that was in July 2020, when that was before the Anthony Shots profile came to light, right? Robert Ives thinks it wasn't premeditated. Do you think the Anthony Shots information changes things? Do you think that shows that it was premeditated, that there was luring? Like he seems to say, I don't think they were lured, it was random. Do you think the Anthony Shots thing was a new lead that seemed to indicate that there was not only luring but premeditation? So can you see how even with a very smart prosecutor, no matter how clever you are, you're only as clever as the evidence that you've got. You're only as clever as what you know, right? And that's why you need this, right? Even if you're a prosecutor and you were at the crime scene, you're only as clever as what you know, and you should maybe remind yourself that maybe you don't know certain things, right? Maybe there's other things out there that you're not aware of. And so be curious, have have the scout mindset. So weird, like in this position, it looks like I don't have a body, that my body is a book. Maybe that is true. All I've achieved in my entire life is my body is a book. Basically this book. Okay, so my body is a book. Okay, that's who I am. Anyway, you guys get what I'm saying? That even the smartest kind of person, well, all you've got to work with is what you know, and so you've got to keep getting information. You've got to keep investigating, keep getting, bringing in evidence, and over time that becomes a body of work and a it gives shape to the actual case. And isn't that what happened here? Even though he went to the crime scene, he couldn't possibly have imagined what was going on the social media at that time. Thanks a lot, Bonnie. I appreciate that. Okay, so the next thing that I want to deal with is, this is quite interesting. So he says here, let's bring it up, is asked, would you characterize this crime as something where the guy just stepped in all the right places? In other words, was he a mastermind? Right? And then he said the following. If you look at the overhead photos, there was maybe one house that could look down and see the crime scene. It's unlikely anybody would be there. This was a daylight crime where people could have come along And he says, I just can't see it as a big master plan. It'd be a crazy master plan. I kind of disagree with him there. I don't think it's the best plan in the world. And I mean, he was recorded on camera. But I don't think it's totally crazy either, because let's face it, he got away with it for 5.5 years. He says, I do, and somebody else highlighted here, I do not believe it was a planned crime. I believe it was. I mean, even in the restricted sense where you say, if he was walking along the bridge, they were on that side, he was on this side, and he was walking along the bridge. And while he was on the bridge, he thought, I'm going to do this. Well, then it's premeditated. I don't think that's how he's framing it. But because I actually believe the premeditation went on probably for weeks before that. I think from the moment the perpetrators said, hey, do you guys want to meet on the 13th? That was when the premeditation kicked in. I think that's always an important question to ask. In the Chris Watts case, when did the premeditation really kick in? There were thoughts about it, but when did it really manifest? And that is something I've addressed in my books and blogs about the Chris Watts case. Then he also said, you know, this luring thing. Let me bring that up. You know, this luring thing that I told you, and I hope the state police said this. I don't believe there's any evidence they were lured. And this guy went to the crime scene. Well, it turns out, it looks like there was evidence that they were lured. I mean, the day that they went there was this interaction with Anthony Shots. So there was, right? It looks like there was evidence that they were lured, right? He says, this is his scenario. He says, I think they just decided to go for a walk. They were great friends. They just thought, it's a nice day, let's go walk the trail. I think that's all that happened. So can you see how that is a very fragmented way of looking at this case? And it probably influenced a lot of people over the years, that kind of thinking. I think they didn't just go for a walk. They intended to meet someone. They intended to meet Anthony Shots. They went there the day before Valentine's Day because they were young teenagers. And someone was playing that psychology against them. Possibly someone with a similarly young daughter who also got giddy and you know, very excited as Valentine's Day approached, right? So can you see how you must be careful, even when you've got a expert, a very qualified expert, and he is, somebody who went to the crime scene, and he did, someone who knows this case from the inside, and he definitely did that. You've got to be careful. It's nevertheless also their opinion. That he may know certain things way beyond what we know, but you've got to be careful assuming that he's the absolute authority. You've got to be careful doing that with anybody. You've got to think for yourself. You've got to think critically. You've got to keep being curious, ask questions, and, you know, make up your own damn mind. Thanks a lot, Targol Tran. Thanks a lot for that. Susan says, yes, yes, yes. Okay. And then he, at the bottom here, he says, what does he say? He says, I don't believe that. For somebody to be right then, to know they'd be there, I don't believe that. I wouldn't be shocked if it turned out I'm wrong, but I don't believe that someone knew they were going to be there. So, I mean, that aged quite well. I wouldn't be shocked if it turned out I'm wrong, but I don't believe that someone knew that they were going to be there. Obviously, it helps to get additional information, right? It definitely helps to be on this side of time and the evidence. Okay. Somebody says, was he telling them that Anthony's shots was down the hill? I doubt it. I think I mean, Libby was already recording him. I think they knew pretty early on that this is trouble, that this is bad, that this isn't what they signed up for, right? Sokoi Cat says, are we going to get this link? Yeah, I can give you the link again. You can read the full thing. Where is it? Over here. So I'll put 3 links in chat. You can read the full transcript at that link. You can also go to this, it's this episode 5 of Signatures, right, from HLN. You can listen to that from the Down the Hill podcast. And you can read this article from March 2014. Prosecutor says cops likely have met Delphi killer. In other words, that they thought he was a local, and he was a local. They were certainly right about that. Although they did start to deviate from that psychology where they thought he's a SO and he's from, maybe he's not from here. And then you can also read, if you're interested, a new attorney has been appointed for Richard Allen, and his name is Baldwin, Andrew J. Baldwin. So that's the identity of his public defender, I guess. It's a court-appointed attorney. It's not a private one, right? So it's a public defender. Okay. Yeah, Baldwin, that's right. Okay, well, that is it from my side. Is there anything else that I dealt with here? Let's just remember that this is who it's about. Well, it says it's your last free article. Okay. This is who this is about. Abby and Libby. This is another picture of them. And it's been 5 long years trying to get justice for them, and we'll probably get up to about 6 years. But at least things are kind of going in the right direction, right? So overall, I hope you found this analysis useful. I feel like we are understanding the maps a lot better. I think we're understanding the movement to the crime scene and away from the crime scene better. I feel like we know where the crime scene is, which is like True Crime 101. Where is the effing crime scene? So I think that is a step in the right direction. I think we have a better handle on the lone wolf scenario, but also how it's connected to a luring type scenario. I also think we know certain aspects in more detail. For example, that Libby's phone was found with her at the crime scene, wasn't found like dropped by the bridge or sort of earlier on. I also think that we are in a better position to speculate that a vehicle was possibly part of the fabric of this case. And it possibly explains why Richard Allen's vehicle was also seized on the day that they searched his house. So, you know, all of that makes sense. And I think the vehicle is also, I think, part of this idea of animal hairs. I mean, I take my dog in my vehicle all the time, coming onto the victims' bodies, but also, you know, it's where he could get a toolbox, he could get ropes, he could get medication or whatever, he could wipe his hands, he could change his shirt before he arrived home, all of that kind of thing. He's not going to just walk It's his home behind me. He's not going to just walk from the woods through the front door. Hi, honey, I'm home. He's going to arrive home in his vehicle, but with a change of clothing. We know Chris Watts did that as well, right? So I think overall, would you guys agree that this was about narrowing down scenarios? Do you think we've succeeded in doing that? We have narrowed it down. We have gotten a better sense of this crime, despite the fact that we know so little, despite the fact that we've been sort of struggling to some extent in the dark. We have gotten a sense of what really happened, a better sense of what happened. Okay, let's have a look at some of your comments. Cheryl says absolutely. Love Tina says only place I see they could take them quickly is Logan's. Bonnie says your instruction, content, and style is better than. Thanks very much. Really appreciate that. Sylvia says my question is why would Libby originally ask her sister if she wanted to go there if they were going to meet an older guy? Yeah, but they didn't know that he was an older guy. Oh, I see what you mean. Not that old. Well, Libby was in love with him, and a lot of teenagers, I don't know if you remember when you were a teenager, a lot of teenagers don't necessarily tell the truth because they want something so badly. They also know that if they tell the truth and that will lead to something not happening, they're then economical with the truth, right? Someone says, I feel so comfortable here. That's good to hear. Good to hear, Cheryl. While niece is in the house, Wolfie says, I get a better sense of it every time we discuss it. That's also good to hear. It does feel like we're getting closer, right? And that's the difference between speculating, kind of randomly making your way. You want to kind of systematically build your case, almost like a lawyer, right? Nisi says, sorry I missed this live. Thank you for all the incredibly hard work. Yeah. Love to Timmy and the sheep. Yeah. That sheep is a lamb that its mother died during childbirth. And so it's being hand reared at home by a friend of mine. So thanks a lot for that. My King of Kings says, love these discussions, such smart people here. Thanks for the compliment. Deborah says, you have gone far above and beyond to get your information across to us. I just want to thank SM Kovalinski for being part of that process, Terry Dean as well, to some extent, Stephanie as well. Stephanie's got a very clear idea of certain things, and it's always good to, share ideas and get a sense, because if somebody argues with your idea, you've got to defend and explain why you say something. So having a difference of opinion is also very good, especially if it's an informed opinion as well. So Kami Burchett, hi, I'm joining late. Hi, bye. I'm about to say goodbye. By the way, I must tell you guys that the third and final analysis in the Caitlin Armstrong is going to blow your mind. It's really incredible. It's full of really eye-opening insights. So even if you haven't watched 1 and 2, make sure you don't miss 3. I'll be doing that probably this time tomorrow, a little bit earlier, but this time tomorrow. It's really wow. I'm while I was putting the script together, I was like, wow, red flag, wow. So make sure you don't miss that. Also, if you haven't caught the first and the second discussion, make sure you do catch it. It does say part 2 in the previous one, and so on. So at least catch part 2. But if you haven't, just join us and you'll see it's really, really interesting, the Caitlin Armstrong case. If you don't know what the Caitlin Armstrong case is, this particular episode will give you a really good introduction to that. And it'll, it's going to be quite a hard-hitting show, so make sure you don't miss it. USA Libertarian says we don't know exactly what was said that morning, but we do know that they were in touch for weeks, that she was in love with Anthony Shots, and that there was contact that very morning and even over the weekend. We know that. And we know that she was 14 years old, and it was the day before Valentine's Day, and that he was promising all sorts of things. He was promising to give her all sorts of things. So let's have a look. Yeah, Fisher King is amazing. If you guys haven't watched it, make sure you do. Abby didn't have a phone, Libby did. Yeah, that's true. Wolfie says, I might watch the Fisher King tomorrow. You'll really enjoy it. It's worth the effort. It's got Robin Williams in it, really good cast. So I think one of the actresses won an Academy Award for that. Sassy says, how do you feel about the probable cause being released? I think if it protects the case to not release it, they shouldn't release it. I don't think it's so unusual. I think that there's possibly a plea deal, and that's why it's not being released. Terry Dean says, I can't wait for the Armstrong Live. Yeah, it should be really worth it. Okay, so that's it from me. I think we're going to sign off before 2:30. Elise also says, looking forward to that tomorrow. Okay, cool. So make sure you don't miss that third part to the Caitlin Armstrong case. I want to thank a lot of you guys in chat. It was really interesting. Thanks for not giving me too much of a hard time. Sometimes you've just got to give me a chance just to share my research. And afterwards you can say, nah, that doesn't really work. Or you can say, wow, I was curious and I listened and I actually thought a lot of other things, but does that make sense? Doesn't it make sense? Maybe that part makes sense, maybe that part doesn't. But thanks a lot. You guys are always really a great crowd. I want to welcome the new members, and I also want to thank so many of you for your super chats. Remember, if you're watching this on replay and you've enjoyed this, you found it useful, important, interesting, intelligent, all those things, you're welcome to hit the thanks button. Also, bear in mind, I'm really trying to get this channel to 100,000 subscribers. So if you're new to the channel and you know of other sort of forums, Facebook, Reddit, whatever, maybe you're commenting on blogs or something, you're welcome to put links to this video or other videos that you think, well, I've either done a really good job or maybe you think I've done a terrible job, maybe you disagree. But if you do agree, maybe you can sort of share on your networks. Also, if you know someone who's very interested in the Delphi case, but their opinion differs from yours, maybe you can also send it to them. Okay, so I know we tend to say like, share, leave a comment, but please make an effort to share more during this period as you try and get to 100,000 subs. I would really appreciate it. Okay. Kami says you always do a great job. Thanks a lot. Yeah, that's it. Like, share, and subscribe. Cool. But in the opposite order. Subscribe. Sorry. Share. No. Subscribe first. Share second. Like third. Cool. Denise said, I really enjoyed this live stream tonight. Can't wait until November 22nd to see if more info will be released. Yeah, that is when the media are going to sort of, petition for, public access. I definitely think there's more to the story. No, there definitely is. There definitely is. Wolfie says, I share your John Bonet shows in my group. Thanks a lot for that. Songbird says, I started watching you 4 years ago. So if you could see what I can see, like in front of me, the sky has become illuminated. It is a new day. It is Tuesday. It's 5:45 in the morning, and I actually need to take the garbage out. But it looks like it's going to be quite a nice day. We've actually had quite a lot of rain here. So I think you guys need to grab a pillow. I hope you are going to have a good sleep. Nisi says, love the beanie. I actually need to make a TCRS beanie for you guys. Yeah, justice for Abby and Libby. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Jeanette. Catherine says, loved it, very insightful. Cool. Thanks a lot to all of you. To the mods, thanks very much. Terry, Dean, Stephanie, all the members as well. Boost Blustery Day, Mendy Harris, Cass Lou, Zircon, all of you guys. Thanks very much for being here. Nisi as well. Good. We haven't seen you for a while. So take care. Hope you have a wonderful Tuesday. I'm starting mine. Make sure you get a good sleep so that you can start yours refreshed and ready. Take care. Remember not to miss that live tomorrow dealing with Caitlin Armstrong. It's really going to be worth it. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time.